Great. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to launch the 2021 Indigenous Connectivity Summit Policy Recommendations. We're really proud of the document this year, and I'm going to include the link in the chat right now so you all have it at your disposal. It's on our website already, so you can follow that link and check it out. And you'll also see that our 2020 and 2019 policy recommendations are linked in there as well. So for our session today, I'm going to give a brief overview of the recommendations and how we created them. Then I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful panelists for moderated discussion, and we'll close by taking questions from the audience. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function. You should be able to see that at the bottom of your screen. It's right next to raise hand and right next to live transcript, which you can also use the closed captioning for automatic captions if that's something that you want to use. And also, please feel free to use the chat for discussion. Seeing a lot of familiar faces here in the audience, so I know you all know each other. Feel free to discuss in there. Great. So this was our 5th year of the Indigenous Connectivity Summit, or as we like to call it, the ICS. And it was our 2nd year of doing it entirely virtually, and it was our 3rd year of creating a set of policy recommendations. So for the past 3 years, the policy recommendations, they've just been getting better and better, and this year's document is no exception. It's highly comprehensive, and it covers the entire process of establishing connectivity, from creating partnerships to ensuring data sovereignty and sustainability once the network is operational. The recommendations are born from the participants of the ICS Policy and Advocacy Training, which is a 6-week training leading up to the ICS. Throughout these 6 weeks, participants hear from experts from a multitude of sectors to gain an understanding of the important policy issues in connectivity and how to affect change through advocacy. And the final session of this training was a collaborative brainstorm where participants moved into breakout groups and they offered their feedback on which of the 2020 policy recommendations were outdated and where we need new language and what new priorities have arisen within the past year. So after this session with the training participants, we at ISOC, we pulled together all of their notes and their discussions and their thoughts, and we put it into a draft document that we brought to the wider group of ICS participants. And as a group, we workshopped and we wordsmithed the recommendations before voting unanimously to pass the document as the 2021 ICS policy recommendations. And the recommendations this year are very comprehensive, like I said before, and they are organized into 7 buckets, which I'll name right now. They are 1, inclusivity, community consultation, engagement. 2, spectrum rights and sovereignty. 3, engaging local capacity in Indigenous communities. 4, infrastructure and ownership. 5, beyond infrastructure, digital literacy, data sovereignty, and sustainability. 6, affordability. And 7, effective and accurate mapping. I want to note a few highlights and major changes that we have to this year's document compared to the 2020 recommendations. I would highly recommend that you go through and check out the recommendations because there's a lot of good stuff in there, but I'm just going to go through a few things that I want to make sure you all are aware of. So first, we expanded our first section on community engagement to emphasize the responsibility of non-Indigenous entities and the American and Canadian governments to be inclusive of Indigenous voices at every step, including at the very beginning before networks are even being talked about, by hiring salaried Indigenous staff to provide guidance and insight into all of the policy processes that impact Indigenous areas. Second, the community thought it was really important to change the terminology of capacity building to say engaging local capacity. I think this is a really strong example of how words really matter. And our new terminology emphasizes that any external entities that want to partner with Indigenous communities need to hire local Indigenous contractors and workers. And they must also focus their efforts on training local community members to create jobs within the community. And they must also prioritize hiring non-local Indigenous entities only in the case that contractors needed for the project are not in the local community. Lastly, I want to note that our Beyond Infrastructure section is brand new this year, and it focuses on digital literacy, data sovereignty, and sustainability. Now that infrastructure is a much more well-known issue across North America in the US and Canada, our community is thinking about the steps following infrastructure and how we can ensure that communities can use the internet to their advantage and keep their networks running in the long term. So before we get into it with our panelists, I want to encourage you all to use this document and the ICS recommendations from the past in your advocacy moving forward. We're certainly going to use it at ISOC. We already have been, actually, when we speak to policymakers from the US and Canada, and we're happy to support you all in your advocacy, however we can be helpful. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you'd like to start doing advocacy, and if you'd like our help with anything, we're here to help, and we're here to help you all make connections. So with all of that being said, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. They're all members of our ICS community, and they've been involved with the ICS for different amounts of time, from when it started to just joining this year. So I'm really excited to introduce all of them to you. So I'm going to ask each of them to take 5 minutes to introduce themselves and their work, and to also mention how you got involved with the ICS. So Madeleine, I think I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna, and to the ISOC for the invitation. So I'm based in Iqaluit, which is the capital of Nunavut on Baffin Island next to Greenland, and I've been involved in telecommunications issues for the last 10 years, but got into actually a business a year ago with my business partner. We got a business case and plan to build 3,000 kilometers of subsea fiber into Canada's Arctic. And we've got some interesting developments of late. We signed an MOU with a Norwegian company called Bulk Infrastructure, and they are wanting to build their second fiber optic cable from Norway into northern Canada through Labrador and Nunavut region. And so just a month ago, the owner of Bulk, myself, as well as Big Land Networks, actually toured through that region to sort of scope out the routing, as well as consult and meet with quite a number of key stakeholders, including some very successful discussions with industry, chambers of commerce, the Union Nation, and we're pretty excited too, because we're also having our project taken a look at by some Indigenous Northern organizations and development corporations to potentially invest in this project, which is great, because our goal is to effectively have this network owned and managed by the people, especially Indigenous peoples of those regions. And so we're really, really busy, and our timeline for this project is to look at 2023, 2024. The second, I guess, part of this network is the ability to turn certain segments of the fiber optic into a smart cable. SMART stands for Science, Monitoring, and Reliable Telecommunications, and effectively it's putting sensors on some of these routing. So it allows the cable to effectively measure climate change in the marine environment, everything from salinity, currents, temperature, pressure. Hydrophones can detect noise within the marine environment, helps with monitoring and for environmental protection of marine protected areas, as well as assist with defense, security, and marine intelligence for all domain awareness. So it's really exciting project that we're working on. And maybe just lastly is that it's not so much related to this project, but working hard to help inform Indigenous communities in Canada, as well as our national organizations and the government of Canada, the value and the need to have a dedicated set aside for Indigenous spectrum. It's a natural resource. Currently, we don't have that set aside, and the federal government recently made almost $9 billion selling 5G spectrum. And if we want to see real Indigenous participation in the sector, we need to have that set aside, as well as some dedicated federal investments specifically for Indigenous projects, telecommunications projects. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madeleine. Niniau, I'm going to bump it to you.
Yes, aloha kakayaka from Hawaii. My name is Niniau Kawaihae. I'm a special assistant at the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. The department was actually created in 1959 at statehood when the entirety of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, which passed the US Congress in 1921 and was signed into law by President Warren G. Harding on July 9th, 1921, created this homesteading program and set aside 200,000 acres for half-blood Native Hawaiians across the state. Unfortunately, the lands that were negotiated for, of course, were sub-ag, sub-pastoral, not the bestest of land to do homesteading on. And currently we have about 27,000 individuals on our wait list and about 10,000 individual lessees residing on the homelands. So I think I got involved with the Internet Society back in 2019 when Mark and his team came out to scout for a location for the Indigenous Connectivity Summit. And we were happy to provide assistance. And we held that year's annual summit at Ka'aku'ulo'o Ke'ali Kolani, the College of Hawaiian Language at the University of Hawaii, Hilo. So it was awesome to first get involved with the issues of connectivity and tribal broadband. And from that summit, the Federal Communications Commission did release a 2.5 gigahertz spectrum set aside for tribal governments and for Native Hawaiians. And last year, we successfully applied for 5 licenses, mostly on all of them on the neighbor islands, because the main island of Oahu, where I am, has no available spectrum. So we're really excited with the current Congress, the last 2, the infrastructure bill plus the Consolidated Appropriations Act that came out of the COVID-19 pandemic, set aside about $60 million for the Department of Hawaiian Homelands to provide access and infrastructure to Native Hawaiians living on our trust lands.
Mahalo, Niniau. Now I'm going to turn it over to Leonardo.
Hello, I'm Leonardo Wassilie. I'm currently in Niniau, Alaska, and I do some work out of Anchorage, but I've lived here all my life, and I joined the Internet Society, back in September. So kind of give a brief history. I've worked in Alaska all my life, and I've kind of been involved on the high-end level of taxation, working for a CPA firm, and doing financial reporting and working with clients on a lot of compliance issues with the laws, regulations, accounting issues, contracts, financial statements, financing. We're involved in a lot of different projects. And so then I started to just continue part of my continuing education is I was always really interested in data. And so I really focused on my continuing education in like data analytics, blockchain, some of the different technologies that are coming out that are surrounding data sovereignty, data integrity, and cybersecurity. And so those are the things that being an accountant, you start getting a real good grasp of like internal controls and the structures of things and where things interact in an environment, especially when we have to do audits and things like that. And so eventually got to a point where I just had a awareness, you could say, an awakening, and deciding we have a lot of our indigenous communities that were struggling with COVID, and a lot of the financial issues that were a lot of people were struggling with. And I decided that it was a good time to leave the firm and go to work for myself. And so I started my own single member LLC to focus on kind of the high end level of accounting and business consulting. So so I just kind of interjected myself into some different policies, and we started this between my brother and Nikos. We started a nonprofit back in September, and we started a nonprofit called Sandbury Tribal Associates to focus on the very issues that are we've been Carl and Nico's been working on for a long time, and with my strengths in organization and accounting, it was kind of a good mix of between my brother's a biologist, Nikos is a sociologist, and I'm kind of a economist, right? And so or data analyst, and so being able to kind of put that together, we started the nonprofit. And one of the things that Nikos did is he's involved in a lot of conferences, and he got involved in a conference where there was the Internet Society, and so he sent me a link, and I just gravitated towards it, and all of a sudden I'm just like, wow, this is so awesome. And where I could come to a place and ask questions, and there was like I could ask endless amounts of questions and get and it was just an awesome opportunity to get involved. And so so I've been involved since September, but I feel like working with such great individuals and great organizations, I feel like I've been a part of this for a long time. So, and to circle back, some of the things that I worked with my grandfather on, years and years and years ago, are some of those relationships are coming back. So, and this, it's kind of like a circle back into some, picking up where some of the things that my grandfather left off, in communication infrastructure in the state of Alaska that he was a integral part of. So, I feel like it's like sort of like destiny to almost, take over some of the connectivity issues and use that strength to really help coordinate the tribes and indigenous communities in Alaska, and learn from our indigenous communities and people who are doing it now. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, everyone. I also realized I neglected to introduce myself. My name is Anna Higgins, and I'm a project and policy advisor here at the Internet Society, and I've been helping to put on the ICS for about 3 years now. So thank you for those introductions. The first question I have for the panel is I wanted to ask if you all could share what the central issues around Indigenous connectivity are on the ground where you are in your community or in your region. I'll let whoever wants to start jump in.
I'll just continue since my mind's fresh. And so some of the interesting things that are happening in Alaska. So there's a group, it's called the Alaska Tribal Spectrum. And so it's a consortium of like 100 tribes, and they banded together, and because what they realize is they don't have individual capacity in their villages to be able to provide a service that would be, cover the cost, but together as a consortium, they can go after, they can basically consolidate administration. And so I think that will allow for, some of these ideas to happen and get the 2.5 gigahertz broadband into these communities. And I'm not quite, I just learned about it about a week ago, and with the holidays and a lot of things, the outreach is there. And I've got in touch with a policy board member who I work with on another contract, but and so I have a really good and he's on the board, and so of this, and so it's a real good opportunity for outreach. And I've already kind of mentioned some of the things that we've been working on here at the Internet Society, and just to kind of, you know, get some ideas implanted and thoughts. And one of the things he made a comment is, you sound just like our COO or chief operating, you know, I mean, that's one of the things I'm planning to do this week, is reach out to their kind of the person who's in charge that this policy board gave me the number to. And so part of this is we've been looking at some of the other projects going on in the state, and there's another one that's using low Earth orbit satellites, and they're a 17 tribe that is one of the tribal members is actually getting connected. So I haven't reached out to them. We've been doing some you know, kind of research into just what's going on here. And so but there's also an interesting fiber optic project that it's between Doyon, which is a native corporation. And so to kind of, you know, give a quick and brief description, there's native corporations, and then there's villages, and one's a nonprofit and one's a for-profit. And so the nonprofit villages, you know, they have access to the spectrum licensing, whereas the native corporations have access. They own the land that's these villages operate on and you know, live. And so that's just kind of give you a real quick and brief overview of how they interact. And so, and then there's regional corporations, and then there's village corporations. So these regional corporations, they're going after these huge, you know, fiber optic projects. So those are some of the things that I've found that are going on in the state.
Thank you. Madeleine or Niniau, can you share some of the central issues going on in your areas?
So in Northern Canada, where I live, we're 100% satellite dependent. That means that connectivity is often very poor. It's not reliable. It's not stable. It's not secure, low throughput, and as well as it's extremely expensive. So in a recent report, which I posted the link, called Waiting to Connect, it actually speaks to you know, the reality of many northern remote Indigenous communities in Canada. I remember when I was part of an ISOC conference down in New Mexico, there was one of the panelists was saying, you know, the connectivity gets worse and worse the further that you're away from a road. We don't have roads that come into our territory. So the other thing, having just recently driven in Labrador, I was very shocked to find that, you know, there's a brand new paved road, you know, would have cost tens of millions of dollars. So great that infrastructure was updated. And then to see that there is a fiber optic line about, you know, 10 feet away from the road, and yet over 1,000 kilometers of that sort of main artery has no service. And it's you know, connecting Indigenous communities, and there's hydro plants, there's a lot of resource development, and just, you know, the fact that one had to bring a satellite phone with you because it's not safe. And yet the infrastructure, you know, the paved road, the fiber optic right there. And the fact that despite the millions of dollars in investments that were made for that infrastructure, you know, no thought put to the necessity of the safety of the people who need to travel on that road. So we're not as strategic or smart in ensuring that these these investments produce the best outcomes. And so that waiting to connect report actually, illustrates that the system is broken, the approach in how the government provides these investments, and effectively resulting in racist outcomes, especially for Indigenous people in rural remote Canada. So it's really shocking. We have almost $2.7 billion that the federal government's prepared to invest in infrastructure, and we don't have a real strategy. There's all this, different pots of money that different proponents or communities are trying to apply for. And now the federal government's, challenged with almost having 1,800 applications and trying to sort of make sense of, where are the best projects to back. My fear and concern is that in many of our northern parts of Canada, a lot of the proponents, just simply didn't apply because they didn't have capacity. You had to do an online application, which in of itself, was an immense barrier just to get that information. You had to upload, just sheer reams of documents, huge documents with like lots of data, because a lot of it had to be maps. So there's so many different ways in which we are shut out from being able to access funding, not just telecommunications funding, lots of programs, lots of project funding, because we just do not have good connectivity. And as I said, and even when you get connectivity, you're paying over the odds. We pay for the highest rates for telecommunications, and yet receive the absolute worst service. Things have to change. This is not acceptable.
Wow, I have to say that I'm always amazed that despite how far away we all are, we're connected by similar issues. And I think for Hawaii, being in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, we had an undersea cable that belonged to a native-owned telecommunications carrier that, because of fraud, went bankrupt, and the Department of Justice prosecuted the owners. And so in the bankruptcy last year, a local subsidiary of Cincinnati Bell bought the undersea cable and the middle mile. And being part of the first mile, where that goes directly to our lessees, it's been challenging to figure out, what actually of the infrastructure that was built from 1996 through probably a couple of years ago is actually fiber and what is copper. And then trying to figure out with the federal monies that are coming for infrastructure, how do we upgrade the copper? How much will that cost, with estimates at $150,000 to $200,000 a mile, to try and get at least 25.3? Yeah, because right now those on copper wiring are getting less than 15, which is really terrible. Last year during the pandemic, when you're trying to do distance learning, teleworking, and you have multiple children or even multi-generational families, 15 people living in a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house. So I think the challenge for Hawaii will be the shipping, the increased costs with the supply chain issues, and then not only DHHL, but the tribal governments on the continental US, everybody's going to be looking for the same thing, right? To do broadband infrastructure and network connections. So we're just hopeful that, going forward, we have a strategy, at least for Native Hawaiians. And we've been fortunate that we started that strategy once we started applying for the 2.5 gigahertz licenses from the FCC.
Thank you, all of you. So my next question, kind of a two-parter, and feel free to answer just one or the other or both, but I want to ask how the policy recommendations relate to your experiences with Indigenous connectivity and how you think these policy recommendations are going to affect the conversations around Indigenous connectivity in your area for the next year.
So the recommendations are very useful in attempting to make any application or, political case as to how and why we need to see a better approach and better investments, a better working relationship, especially with Indigenous peoples. So the more robust these reports are, and the more that they align with each other, especially the recommendations, is the goal is to begin to, inform those that are making the policies, those that are making decisions, and the value and the need to make the adjustments so that if we truly do believe in seeing Indigenous reconciliation, Indigenous economic reconciliation, and having rural remote Canada better connected, we're trying to get those, especially in Ottawa, in our central sort of national governments, to think and recognize that they need to act differently because they need to think differently.
I think for us, the policy recommendations are very helpful, not only at the county and state level, but at our federal level with our congressional delegation as they consider appropriations, whether it's for broadband infrastructure or workforce development. It'll help guide, hopefully, their thoughts. Yesterday, I was very happy to join Anna as we met with a staffer from Hawaii's senior senator to talk about the policy recommendations. And I thought that was so helpful that it's another entity plus the department talking about these policy recommendations and not just DHHL as a native agency, trying to bring forth and highlight alone the critical issues of affecting Indigenous people globally. So yes, I certainly see that these policy recommendations will be very helpful for us in the state legislature, as well as going forward with our congressional delegation.
And I touched on it a little bit earlier when I met with that policy board member, and I just that he actually had other members of the tribe that were on a conference call, and so they got an opportunity to hear what I was talking about. So just to give them what they heard was like I say, kind of some of the things that were echoing from some of their other board members, which is a good thing, because that there's some synergy to build from, and so I feel like having the policy recommendations gives a really good structure to be able to reach out and discuss how to go about some of these ideas in the communities and in this consortium, and being involved in the internet society. We've seen small little operations that work for companies, and then we've seen operations that work for entire islands and and networks of islands. So having that broad range of understanding of how these recommendations fit into these different ranges of operations is it's really helped me understand the data flow. So, and putting the dots together, and helping our be able to describe that to our tribal members and help them connect the dots, and so when they're hearing some of the same things, then it's helping them, really integrate these policy recommendations into their operations. So.
Yeah, thank you for your answers. And another thing I want to add is I was on another, I was on a call yesterday with Niniau, with a staffer from Senator Schatz's office. And I also met with another a member of Congress's office with another member of our ICS community, EJ John, who I see is in the audience. And the staffer also mentioned to us that even though, the infrastructure bill in the US has passed and it's been signed into law, there's a lot of attention now on how that's going to get implemented and how NTIA and other departments and other agencies can be as inclusive as possible of Indigenous communities when they're doing that implementation. And so I think that I just wanted to note that because we are launching these ICS policy priorities, these policy recommendations. Coincidentally, the infrastructure bill just passed in the US. So it's kind of like, there's already legislation and it just passed, but there's still room for advocacy in there. Implementation is another piece of the puzzle. It's really important, and it's really important to keep up the advocacy throughout that as well. So I see a question in the Q&A function from Adelina Pasi, and I'm going to read it out to you all. So Adelina asks, or she says, due to COVID, connectivity should be viewed as a human right because of its vitality in providing crucial access to healthcare via telehealth appointments, access to education via distance learning, etc. How can connectivity seen as a human right help push policies to provide connectivity within Indigenous communities where none exists and improve poor connectivity? What are some important data that we need to emphasize or that we need to collect and provide to our elected officials to emphasize the importance of this issue?
So I'm going to jump in. So in the last month, we've had the RCMP, which is our police in our part of Northern Canada, actually issue a notice that if there's any residents that require their assistance, to go physically to the detachment because the connectivity, the ability to call them or reach them in any way was not possible due to the telecommunications going down. When the city of Iqaluit declared a state of emergency because the water was contaminated with hydrocarbons, it happened to be raining that afternoon. And so the ability for the city to ensure that the residents were aware not to consume or use the water under any circumstances for any use was hampered because of just weather conditions. I mean, so it's really, really important that communication is stable and reliable in order for, not just telehealth, not just education, but, safety. Fundamentally, we also need to be, able to reach out when we are facing, let's say a domestic violence situation, someone's having a heart attack. Also, someone's been hit and injured. We need to be able to reach out to the first responders. And also when someone goes out on the land and has an accident or is missing, we need that telecommunications in order for to provide the assistance that people need. Lives are at stake.
Yeah, and I think what we realized and to the last question about what kind of data that can be provided to elected officials, Hawaii recently, earlier this year, began a study on digital literacy. And we had the final report, I think, come out last month. And it was just interesting to see in this post-pandemic Hawaii, how a lot of people over the age of 55 can't access telehealth services or could not access telehealth services during the pandemic because they either one, didn't know how to use their device, or two, didn't have a device with sufficient capacity that could do video, that could do audio. And then these are, in talking with some of our local hospital administrators about this issue when we were designing our application for the NTIA grant that we turned in August 31st. It wasn't only about COVID patients. It was about those Native Hawaiians and those community members that have ongoing health issues, whether it's obesity, someone who's 400 or 500 pounds could not, come get a weigh-in at the hospital, or people couldn't come out to take care of the patient, until we got the vaccine situated. So there were like gaps in healthcare that we saw, that we realized in providing digital education on just the basics of how to set up a Gmail account, how to access, your healthcare providers, web Zoom or whatever for healthcare. And then the Hawaii State Libraries utilize their CARES Act money to set up Wi-Fi hotspots. Wi-Fi's free Wi-Fi surrounding our public libraries in the state, as well as certain libraries were able to build out private rooms so that elders or homeless who did not have access to internet or a device could utilize the public library service for free and engage with their healthcare providers. So,
unfortunately, in Naqaluit, they shut down the library where the community access program runs out of. So our homeless or those that don't have the equipment and the internet at home were unable to use any internet. And a lot of the government programs for COVID, you had to apply online, and the Service Canada office was closed. And so it really made the most vulnerable members of our community even more vulnerable.
I also wanted to add, that, that there's a lot of communities in Alaska, that like this Zoom session right now, they can't even have a Zoom session. Like there's absolutely no way, to even have it connect, to even say hi. And, I know that a lot of people's mental health is tied to being able to connect with people. And, and when with COVID already, restricting people connecting and being involved in their communities, and that it's a, another, tax on the mental health of a lot of people. And, this, just looking forward to this today was, was uplifting my mental health. So, it just, not that I'm ever in a bad place, but it's, this is always, looking forward to these, Zoom sessions and interacting with people and educating and knowledge. And I wanted to touch on is, emergency response, because, being able to respond to emergencies is and having that, connectivity is important. So, and and that one of the things I noticed, that there was a earthquake, an 8.2 earthquake out in Perryville, Alaska, a few months ago, and I never received a notification that there was a tsunami, right? And I was in Anchorage, and and it's miles, or it's hundreds of miles away from the epicenter, but that was supposed to be that was supposed to be a statewide, anybody who's on the coast, could, suffer, the effects of that tsunami. So, emergency communications and being able to respond to is another real key aspect of the internet connection. In addition to, just commerce, and having people be able to do work from home, or or just be able to work from their communities, right? Because when I interact with one of the board members I mentioned earlier, you know, I call him on his phone and he says, you have to call me back on my landline. And so, you know, it's just, you know, another wrench, you know, in that whole, you know, just you lose synergies, you lose thoughts, you know, there's just sometimes, you know, you're subject to things that are just out of your control, but are in the control of a lot of other people, and you know, that give, you know, certain rights, right? And I mean, those human rights, right? I mean, to, you know, happiness and to security, right? And those things are so integral. So, and internet connectivity is near the top of, you know, of making that happen.
And the other thing I just want to add is that, you know, if you were lucky enough to have that connectivity, which is often, you know, even unstable, as Leonardo has explained, is that there's no money provided for, let's say, that e-health consult. Like, I hadn't realized until, you know, COVID had hit and we were doing all these Zooms, and every Zoom call just consumed so much of my monthly, you know, limited bandwidth. And then the overage costs started coming in. And I was able to start calculating that almost every Zoom call was going to cost me $100 to participate. And everything went on Zoom so quickly. Within the first month, I started receiving $1,000+ bills, you know, and so I had to start saying, if you want me to participate, you're going to have to help me, you know, offset some of my internet costs. And as I said, if you're poor, of which up to 70% of our people are living in poverty, you're making choices between whether you pay your rent, your heat, your food bill, or your internet. And as Leonardo said, the need to be able to get information. Right now we're in a water crisis. Where's the water being available? Oh, we've run out. You need to go to another location. You need to be able to access that information. And for most of our residents, that actually means Facebook. And Facebook takes a lot of broadband because there's just so much data on that platform, but it's the platform to get informed.
And let me just add to that, because, you know, some of that data is being informed and it's good, and there's a lot of bad data too. So, yes, you know, and just being able to, you know, have more sovereignty over how that data is being shared, and the, you know, the platforms that are being, you know, utilized to share that data. And, you know, like Facebook is a huge is utilized by a lot of the tribal communities, and so, and it's, they're being, you know, and so a lot of data is being, you know, owned by Facebook that are in, you know, a part of our indigenous communities. So, you know, it's taking back that data sovereignty, and yeah, you know, and really owning our data and not letting it be used by other people.
Another thing I want to note while we're on this topic of, you know, what are the talking points we can use to, you know, show that at the end of the day, like, internet should be a right, and it should be something that it's a human rights issue. I want to point to, in the recommendations, the engaging local capacity section. If you take a look at that, you'll see that in the introductory paragraph to those recommendations, the document includes a reference to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada recently pointed to as something that the Canadian government should be upholding. And you'll see that one of the provisions of the UN DRIP says that there has to be meaningful engagement and education on Indigenous history and culture for management and staff, and equitable access to jobs, training, and education opportunities in the corporate sector. So I think all of this is to say that, these things that when it comes to, Indigenous connectivity, things like engaging the community, hiring Indigenous, hiring local, all of these things are a right. And the government of Canada has effectively signed on to say, yes, we agree that it is a right. So that's something to really champion. I'm seeing some questions in the chat. One of them is from Sally. She says that she has concerns about the claim processes used by federal and provincial funders. It takes hours to upload the claim from Moose Factory. And she's wondering if the claim process template could be designed to use less bandwidth. Madeleine, it seems like it might be for you.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, that's the part of the problem is being able to recognize that we don't all have, fast connectivity. So a lot of the government websites, if you're not sort of, you click send or upload and you're next, and then literally it takes so long and then it times out and all the data that you've inputted is gone. And so you have to start over and over again. Additionally, a lot of the government websites are embedded with a lot of, pictures and graphics, and that consumes a lot of data. And so having, the most basic information, here's the minimal, like the form, is really needed and necessary for our regions. But the main problem is that even if you scrub, a lot of that, if you just got poor connectivity, it doesn't really matter even at that point how much sort of extra visual, graphs or pictures or is on that website if you just can't connect and you can't connect, quickly enough from page to page to page to. And so that's why I said a lot of people were complaining during COVID that they just couldn't access the benefits that they were entitled to, and they had nowhere to go. As I said, Service Canada was closed. A lot of government offices and individuals were just like, well, you just have to go online. Well, I can't go online. And so that's the other thing too, is that these recommendations I find are very, very good, but policymakers and politicians, they need to hear the stories. They can connect to the, when they learn that a single woman of 4 and what her actual income is and how she chose to, eat less and to make the sacrifice so that her family had some connectivity. I mean, these are, we need that balance. Statistics are important. The recommendations are important, but so are the human, realities that politicians and policy people usually can relate to, or at least understand and realize, oh, I didn't realize it was that bad. Didn't realize that that's what's happening.
Thanks, Madeleine. We're having some great discussion in the chat, so please go take a look at that. There's some really good information and really good links in there. Are there any other questions? Oh, Adelina just sent another question in. Perfect. Adelina asks, would there be a way to tack on connectivity into the current health policies, such as the Native Hawaiian Healthcare Improvement Act and the Indian Health Service as amendments, with the purpose of connectivity being a major social determinant of health? And in order to improve the health and safety of Indigenous communities, connectivity must be at the forefront with proposed federal funding.
I totally agree. I think what we saw over the course of the pandemic and the lack of access for telehealth services as well as for distance learning, I think is certainly on the minds of our Hawaii congressional delegation. And I will certainly join in advocating for changes of connectivity and broadband inclusion in the Native Hawaiian and tribal healthcare pieces of legislation.
And I'll add some on the IHS, at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium here in Anchorage, they're the biggest providers of healthcare, or they get the most funding to pass through to the tribes and local communities. But one of the things that being involved in healthcare is I've been writing things, and writing things to people, about recommendations or complaints and things like that. And one day I was so fed up, I wrote everything and wrote recommendations, and I wasn't sure where it would hit, but apparently it hit home because I started seeing some changes. I know I got feedback, I just didn't respond to the feedback at the time, but what I noticed is that I started seeing some of these changes, and I talked to like a new person that was involved in one of these programs, and I said, how are you doing? What program are you involved in? And so I just started asking, and then she started just telling me information. She said, well, we got all this information from our, from the people who are beneficiary owners, and we're making these changes, these recommended changes into our policy, and especially like dental, where you would have like a revolving door at the dental, where you're like, who's my dentist today? And you almost felt like a test subject, right? Because they're just using you to get their dental hours, right? And so I started, identifying these things with them, and so now they're actually, putting together a dentist. You only get enroll in, one dentist, and that's who you only see now. And so, which makes sense, because it's like, to get healthcare, to see, to tell your story to somebody else, how many 10 different times in a year, it's frustrating and inefficient, and there's no vested interest, right, on both sides. And so you don't take your own healthcare seriously, because you get led into whatever, and so what I found is that by advocating and speaking out and advocating for the change you want to see, it makes a difference. And so, just making very specific, say, we need to have IHS, provide for some of our, broadband benefits, right? Or subsidize, or not subsidize, but provide for, our connectivity, or allow us to be able to, have a way to connect, so we can, improve our health. So, that, and be able to, communicate with our families and our communities and our elected representatives. So anyways, that's what I feel like is a really good mechanism for sure, because just writing and making it known. So.
And maybe could I just add that often what I've learned is that government, when they're looking at, let's say, e-health or, e-learning, e-commerce, is always looking at it from what do they, the government, need in order to make that work. It's really, really incumbent on those folks to also understand what do those communities and those individuals actually need at the other end in order to be able to take advantage of e-learning, online, e-health, the patients connecting with the doctors. It doesn't work if it's only been ever looked at it from the government perspective.
Great. Well, looking at the time, I think it's about time that we wrap up. So I want to say thank you to you three, Madeleine, Niniau, and Leonardo. This was a really great session, and we're really excited that the policy recommendations are live, and we hope that all of you, take the recommendations and, champion them in your advocacy. There's a lot of recommendations in there, so don't feel the need to champion all of them at once. It's a very versatile document. You can pick out what you need and what's most relevant to you. And as always, please feel free to reach out to us here at ISOC if you want any assistance with advocacy at all. If you want some more information on specific recommendations, we are here to be of use to you all. I'm going to throw my email in the chat real quick. So thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate your participation, and looking forward to all of the great things that we're going to do with this document in the next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. We hope.
Bye.